Some nights, suffering feels less like pain and more like a quiet weight that will not leave you alone. It sits beside every memory, every regret, every unanswered feeling, and asks to be noticed. What if the softest way through it is not to fight it, but to understand what it has been trying to say? Welcome to the quiet mind. This is a place for peaceful thoughts and quiet wisdom at the end of the day. Tonight, we will sit gently beside suffering and let it become a little less sharp, a little less lonely. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep does not quickly solve. It lives deeper than the body. It lives under the skin of the day, under the duties and the conversations and the ordinary movements of life. It follows you into the evening when the house grows quiet, when the lights are lower, when there is nothing left to distract the heart from itself. That tiredness is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is almost invisible. It looks like staring at a ceiling without really seeing it. It looks like replaying a sentence someone said years ago. It looks like thinking about a person you miss, or a mistake you made, or a version of yourself you have not quite forgiven. It looks like carrying something that has no single name, yet feels very heavy all the same. And perhaps that is what brought you here tonight. Not one sharp problem, but a human ache. Not a crisis that demands rescue, but a tenderness that needs room. There is no need to force clarity right now. The heart does not always speak in neat shapes. Sometimes it only knows how to send out a feeling and wait to see if someone will sit beside it long enough to listen. Suffering is one of the oldest things in the world. Before there were books and cities and philosophies, there was already the soft bewilderment of being alive. There was already hunger and loss, hope and disappointment, love and parting, birth and death, longing and uncertainty. Every human being who ever lay awake beneath a dark sky has felt, in one form or another, the strange weight of having a heart in a world that changes, and yet suffering can feel so personal when it arrives. It can feel like it has chosen you. It can feel like it has entered your room and shut the door behind itself. It can make the world seem very far away, as if everyone else has gone on living in some brighter country while you remain behind with the quiet ache of your own thoughts. This is one of the most painful illusions of suffering, that it isolates, that it tells you that your sadness is private evidence of failure, weakness, or distance from the rest of life. But sorrow is not a sign that you have stepped outside the human story. Sorrow is one of the ways you know you are inside it. It is part of the cost of consciousness, part of the tenderness of caring, part of the price of loving what cannot be held forever. Tonight, there is no need to solve suffering. That is a hard demand to place on a tired mind. It is enough, for now, to come near it without fear, to look at it the way one might look at a sleeping animal at the edge of the room, quietly, carefully, without sudden movement. What is this thing you carry? Where does it live in you? Does it sit in the chest like a stone? In the throat, like words that never found a safe place to land? In the stomach, like a deep old worry? In the eyes, like a kind of invisible weather? Human pain is not only emotional, it becomes physical. It enters the breath. It shortens it. It makes the body brace in places you do not even notice until a quiet night like this one. The shoulders hold stories. The jaw remembers fear. The hands remember what they wished they could keep. The body becomes a quiet archive of everything the heart has lived through. And when the day finally ends, and you are no longer performing steadiness for the world. The body begins to speak in its own soft language. It says, "Here is what was never fully finished. Here is what still aches. Here is what was carried all day in silence." One reason suffering feels so large at night is that time changes in the dark. During the day, life moves quickly. There are tasks to answer, faces to meet, things to prepare, places to go, screens to look at, noise to move through. The mind has less room to linger, but night stretches. A minute becomes 10. A memory becomes a whole landscape. A small regret can suddenly feel like the central fact of a life. A sadness you ignored for weeks can return and sit at the edge of the bed as if it never left. Night is honest that way. It strips away the little protections that daylight offers. It leaves you with yourself, and this can feel cruel when what waits inside is pain. Yet there is also a quiet mercy in it, because what returns at night is often what has been asking, in its wordless way, to be met, not fixed, not judged, not forced into insight, simply met. Sometimes the heart keeps pain alive, not because it enjoys suffering, but because it fears what will happen if it is not finally heard. There are feelings that grow sharper when ignored and gentler when acknowledged. There are inner burdens that tighten when pushed away and soften just a little when someone says, "Yes, I know you are there." The old teachings understood something important about this. The Buddha spoke of pain as a first arrow, and the mind's struggle against pain as a second arrow. The first arrow belongs to life. It is the loss, the illness, the betrayal, the fear, the change you did not choose, the goodbye you were not ready for, the dream that quietly fell apart in your hands. The second arrow is what happens next inside the mind. It is the endless asking of why. It is the refusal to let reality be what it is. It is the secret belief that pain should not have happened, that sadness is a mistake, that suffering means something has gone terribly wrong with the very nature of life. And so the mind turns one wound into many. It reopens what has already happened. It argues with the past. It imagines different endings. It scolds the heart for being affected. It creates a kind of inner warfare. And often, this second arrow is what keeps a person awake long after the first sorrow has arrived. Not only the pain itself, but the protest against it. Not only the loss, but the demand that loss should never have been part of a human life in the first place. This does not mean that you chose your suffering. It does not mean your pain is not real. It does not mean you must become calm simply because a wise idea exists. Human feeling does not work that way. There are sorrows that flood the room before thought can even enter. There are losses so intimate that the whole body grieves before the mind can form a sentence. There are nights when nothing philosophical feels large enough to hold what hurts. And yet, even then, there is a quiet gentleness in remembering that pain and resistance are not the same thing. A heartbreak may be real, and still the mind may be adding a heavy extra layer by saying, "This should not be happening. I should be over this. Other people do not feel this much. I am failing at being alive." These thoughts are not usually cruel on purpose. They are often attempts at control. The mind wants to close the wound by understanding it completely. It wants to end the ache by finding the perfect explanation. It wants to reverse time through thought alone. But suffering is rarely soothed by that kind of pressure. It is more often soothed by a quieter honesty. This is here. This matters. This hurts. And I do not need to turn against myself for feeling it. There is a great difference between drowning in suffering and making a little space around it. If you have ever held a glass of muddy water, you know that shaking it makes it cloudier. Setting it down lets the earth slowly settle. The same can be true of the inner life. The mind can stir pain into greater turbulence by constantly touching it, naming it, fearing it, solving it, measuring it. Or it can sit beside pain with a softer attention, one that says, "I will not leave you, but I will not keep striking the surface either." This kind of attention is not dramatic. It feels almost simple. It might look like noticing that your chest is tight and letting the next breath be a little slower. It might look like allowing a sad thought to pass through without chasing 10 more after it. It might look like saying, very quietly, "Tonight, I do not need to win against my own sadness. There is peace in that." Not complete relief, perhaps, but peace enough for the body to loosen its fist. Peace enough for time to soften. Peace enough for pain to become more like weather than identity. And once suffering is not being treated as an enemy at the gates, another hidden sorrow often reveals itself beneath the surface. Very often, what hurts under suffering is loneliness. Not always the loneliness of being physically alone, though that can be real too. It is a deeper kind, the loneliness of believing that no one could really know what this feels like inside your chest. The loneliness of smiling through the day while privately falling quiet inside. The loneliness of answering simple questions with simple words, because there is no safe way to explain the true shape of your inner weather. You can be in a room full of voices and still feel that the deepest part of you has gone unseen. You can speak kindly, work hard, do what is needed, nod at the right moments, and still return home, feeling that some essential burden remains untouched, unnamed, untranslated. This is one of the most tender parts of suffering. It is not only the pain itself, but the feeling that the pain has become a secret country you now live in, alone. And because so much of human life is performance, courtesy, timing, and function, many people carry this hidden country for years without ever showing its map to another soul. There is also the loneliness of comparison. This can be especially sharp in quiet hours. The mind looks outward and imagines that others are sleeping easily, loving easily, living easily. It sees the calm faces people wear in public and mistakes them for whole truths. It forgets how skilled human beings are at carrying private storms with ordinary expressions. It forgets how much sorrow is concealed inside routine. The person who answers the phone in a steady voice may be holding a grief too deep to describe. The person who makes dinner, pays bills, and remembers birthdays may be walking through an inner winter no one has noticed. The person who seems composed may have spent years learning how to fold pain into neat, invisible corners. Suffering grows sharper when it thinks it is strange. It grows heavier when it believes it is the only shadow in the room. But the truth is quieter and more merciful. Human beings are full of unseen things. Under every calm surface, there is a private history. Under every ordinary day, there are invisible weights. Under every life, there are unanswered questions, old wounds, half-healed memories, and the small, brave effort of continuing anyway. Marcus Aurelius, who spent much of his life close to power and responsibility, kept returning to a simple truth about people. He reminded himself that every person he met was living a difficult struggle, whether visible or hidden. There is tenderness in that thought, not softness in the shallow sense, but a deep, clear seeing. Every person is carrying something. Every person is trying, in some imperfect way, to bear what life has given them. Every person is more fragile and more complicated than their role, their face, their words, or their silence can reveal. When suffering remembers this, it becomes less like exile and more like kinship. Your pain does not make you separate from humanity. It places you in its oldest fellowship. Not the fellowship anyone would choose, perhaps, but a fellowship all the same. The fellowship of those who have loved and lost, hoped and been disappointed, trusted and been wounded, tried and grown tired, stood up in the morning while privately grieving something they could not explain. To remember, this is not to make pain disappear. It is to remove one of its cruelest lies, the lie that says you alone are broken while others remain whole. And perhaps there have been times when you sensed this without words. A stranger looking tired on a train, a cashier whose smile seemed to carry effort, an older face passing quietly in the street, holding years you could not see, a friend who said, very softly, that they had been having a hard time, and suddenly you felt the whole hidden world behind their sentence. It does not take much to remember how mysterious each human life is. One small crack in the surface and you glimpse all that has been carried beneath it. A childhood no one knows about, a love that ended badly, a hope that never came true, a body that hurts in secret, a fear about time, a memory that returns at night, a long effort to appear normal. We are surrounded by untold stories, and this realization can be strangely calming. Not because misery loves company, not because sorrow becomes pleasant when shared by many, but because the heart begins to understand that it is not defective for feeling deeply. It is not weak for growing tired. It is not strange for hurting where others cannot see. It is simply human in the oldest and quietest way. There is a lonely dignity in this. You have likely carried more than many people know. You may have had whole conversations while your mind was elsewhere, sitting beside a worry or an ache. You may have completed ordinary tasks while carrying grief in the background like a low, constant sound. You may have learned how to answer, "How are you?" with a voice that keeps things moving, and perhaps you had good reasons. Not every room is safe for truth. Not every person can hold tenderness well. Not every moment allows the heart to unfold. So you do what human beings have always done. You continue, you adapt, you contain, you keep your inner life folded enough to get through the day. There is nothing shameful in that. But at night, the folds loosen, the hidden things breathe again, and what was managed in daylight becomes more honest in the dark. That is why these hours can feel so exposed. But it is also why they can become sacred. Night can be the one place where you no longer have to perform steadiness. You can simply be the person who is carrying something. No more, no less. When loneliness softens, even slightly, suffering begins to change its shape. It no longer feels only like punishment. It begins to feel more like a language, not an easy language, and not one anyone would volunteer to study, but a language nonetheless. Pain starts saying things the surface of life could not say clearly enough. It points, it reveals, it insists. It tells you where something matters, where something is unfinished, where something was loved, where something has been denied, where the soul itself may be asking for a truer way of living. This does not mean every suffering has a clean message. Some pain is chaotic. Some grief arrives with no lesson. Some wounds remain mysterious for years. But even then, suffering changes the way you see. It slows the rush of ordinary life. It exposes false importance. It makes certain conversations feel shallow and certain silences feel precious. It can strip the glitter from things that once looked essential and draw attention to what quietly endures. A hand held at the right moment. A room where you feel safe. A memory that still warms rather than wounds. A small act of kindness. A little honesty. A little rest. A little mercy. There are forms of suffering that do not merely hurt. They rearrange the inner world. They strip away illusions that comfort had allowed to remain in place. When life goes smoothly, it is easy to believe that tomorrow is guaranteed, that the people you love will remain as they are, that there will always be time to say what matters, that the self you have built is stable and secure. But suffering interrupts these easy assumptions. It makes the fragile nature of life impossible to ignore. It shows how much can change in one phone call, one diagnosis, one goodbye, one silence, 1 year. It reveals how little control anyone truly has over the unfolding of events. And though this can be frightening, it can also be clarifying. Pain has a way of removing decoration. It reveals what you were leaning on. It shows what was false, what was temporary, what was taken for granted. It can bring you painfully close to the essential, not because suffering is noble in itself, but because it leaves less room for illusion. In its hard light, the heart begins to see what matters enough to break for. Viktor Frankl, who knew suffering in one of its most terrible forms, wrote that when people can no longer change a situation, they are challenged to change themselves. This is not a cheerful sentence. It is not a command to enjoy pain or turn suffering into a bright lesson. It is a grave and human observation. There are moments in life when nothing can be undone. A loss is a loss. A body is altered. A chapter is over. A question remains unanswered. At such times, the mind may search desperately for escape and find none. And yet something in the human spirit still asks, who am I now in relation to this? What kind of person will this sorrow shape me into if I let it? Will it close me entirely or make me more tender? Will it leave me bitter toward all beauty or more awake to its fragility? Will it harden my heart against life or deepen my reverence for what is brief and real? Meaning does not cancel suffering. It does not remove tears or bring back what is gone, but it does keep pain from becoming empty darkness. It lets suffering become part of a larger human conversation about what matters most. Sometimes the meaning of suffering is simple, though not easy. It shows you whom you love. It shows you what you cannot pretend does not matter. It reveals what your heart had placed its hope in. A person grieves deeply because a bond was deep. A disappointment stings because the longing behind it was sincere. An ending hurts because something in you truly opened. In this sense, suffering can be the shadow cast by value. It appears where love has. It gathers around what mattered enough to shape your life. This is why some losses do not respond to logic. You cannot reason your way out of mourning what was precious. You cannot hurry the heart past what it had woven into its understanding of the world. Pain lingers around significance. It takes time, because what mattered was real. And perhaps one of the gentlest truths to remember tonight is that your suffering may be telling you something beautiful about your capacity to care. Not beautiful because it hurts, but beautiful because the hurt reveals depth. Only a living heart can ache this way. Only a heart that attached, trusted, imagined, hoped, and loved can be moved so deeply by what life has done. Pain also humbles the self that wanted mastery over everything. There is often, buried inside suffering, the quiet collapse of an image. The image of being the one who could handle it all. The one who knew what life would become. The one who believed effort would guarantee outcome. The one who thought goodness would always be rewarded in ways that made sense. Suffering disturbs those simple stories. It reveals that life is larger than fairness, larger than planning, larger than personal deserving. Good people are hurt. Loving people are left. Careful people lose things. Hopeful people grow tired. None of this means that effort is meaningless. It means only that life is not a machine. It is alive, unpredictable, tender, tragic, astonishing. To suffer is often to be brought back from false certainty into a more honest relationship with reality. This can feel like breaking, but sometimes it is also an awakening. The self that demanded control begins to tire. In its place, a quieter self emerges, one that knows it cannot command life, but can meet life. One that knows it cannot prevent all pain, but can become gentler because of it. One that stops asking for invulnerability and begins asking for truth. And what a strange truth it is, that suffering can make small things feel enormous. Not in a loud way, in a clear way. A glass of water when you are deeply tired. A message from someone who truly means it. A soft blanket. A slow breath that does not catch in the chest. A room where no explanation is required. A little sunlight through a window after a difficult week. The sight of someone resting without needing to prove anything. The sound of dishes in another room when you know you are not alone. Pain simplifies value. It returns attention to the humble miracles that are hidden by speed and abundance. It does not do this because suffering is good. It does it because suffering clears the eye. It teaches what comfort often forgets, that life is made bearable not only by large triumphs, but by small kindnesses, not only by success, but by tenderness. Not only by being understood perfectly, but by being held imperfectly, and still with care. In this way, suffering can deepen gratitude, not the forced gratitude that denies pain, but the quiet gratitude that notices whatever remains gentle in the middle of it. Still, meaning does not erase pain. This is important. If suffering has taught you something, the wound can still ache. If a loss has made you wiser, the absence can still feel real. If hardship has deepened your character, you may still wish the hardship had never come. Human beings are not required to call pain beautiful in order to be mature. It is enough to say, "This hurt me, and still something in me stayed alive. This changed me, and still I do not fully understand it. This broke open some false certainty, and still I grieve what it cost." There is profound dignity in that kind of honesty, not rushing to summarize sorrow, not decorating it with false brightness, not turning it into an inspiring story before the heart is ready. Some truths need to remain tender and unfinished for a while. Some lessons come slowly, mixed with tears. Some meanings are only partly visible from where you lie tonight. That is all right. You do not need to complete your understanding before you are allowed to rest. The soul can keep working in the dark while the conscious mind lets go. Not every mystery must be solved before sleep. At the center of much suffering, there is love. This is one of the most peaceful and painful truths. So much of what hurts in life hurts because the heart was involved, not because it was foolish, not because it was weak, because it was alive, because it reached outward, because it trusted something enough to build a home around it. You suffer where you attached. You ache where you hoped. You grieve where you loved. And this is why suffering is so often tied to the most beautiful parts of life. A parent feels fear because love is deep. A friend misses someone because the bond was real. A person mourns a lost future because hope once lived there vividly. A heartbreak is never only the ending of something. It is also the echo of everything that made the beginning luminous. Pain follows beauty because the heart cannot touch what matters without becoming vulnerable to its passing. To love at all is to stand in the path of grief. Yet no one who has truly loved would choose a life untouched by attachment simply to avoid pain. That would not be peace. That would be absence. There are many forms of attachment, and not all of them announce themselves in obvious ways. Sometimes you are attached to a person, sometimes to an idea of who you thought you would become, sometimes to a season of life that has quietly ended, sometimes to the way someone used to speak to you, or the feeling of being known in a certain room, or the hope that a wound would finally be repaired. Sometimes you ache not because you lost something concrete, but because life moved on before your heart had finished loving what had been. You may miss old versions of people who are still alive. You may miss a younger self who once believed more easily. You may miss a home that cannot be returned to because time itself has changed the shape of it. You may grieve not only what ended, but what never arrived at all. The child you did not become. The peace you thought would come sooner. The apology that never came. The conversation that would have healed something, if only it had happened. These are quiet griefs. They often remain invisible even to those closest to you, but they can weigh on the soul for years. Much of adult suffering is made of these subtle losses. Not only funerals and endings everyone recognizes, but private departures. The day you stopped expecting someone to understand you. The moment a dream lost its color. The realization that some questions will never be answered. The small closing of a door you once believed would reopen. These losses do not always receive ceremony. There are no public rituals for them. No shared language strong enough to hold them neatly, so they continue inside, half named, half hidden. They appear in strange moments, in the middle of washing dishes, in a song, in a smell, in the sight of old handwriting, in the sudden memory of a face, in the pause after someone asks an innocent question. And because these griefs are so ordinary, people often feel they should not carry so much weight. But the heart does not measure importance by public scale. It measures by intimacy, by meaning, by what was once opened and is now empty, by what was hoped for and left unfinished. A private loss can shape a life just as much as a public one. Quiet sorrow is still sorrow. Rumi once wrote that the wound is the place where the light enters you. That line has been repeated so often that it can lose its depth. But at its heart, there is a tender recognition. The places that hurt are often the places where the soul has become more porous, more awake, more capable of seeing beyond the surface of things. A wound changes the way light enters. It softens certainty. It exposes hidden rooms. It makes a person more able to recognize pain in others, more patient with mystery, more reverent toward moments that cannot be kept. This does not mean wounds are desirable. It means they alter perception. They break open the hard shell of the self that once believed it could move through life untouched. Through sorrow, the heart becomes aware of dimensions it once ignored, the sadness of passing time, the holiness of an ordinary afternoon, the enormous value of simple presence, the way love glows most clearly when you know it cannot be guaranteed, the way a quiet voice can save a difficult day, the way tenderness becomes almost sacred in a harsh world. The wound changes what counts as important. There is dignity in heartbreak, not because pain is romantic, but because heartbreak proves that your heart was not asleep. It proves that you let life matter. It proves that something in you did not remain closed, cynical, detached, or untouched. To have been moved enough to suffer is evidence of depth. It is evidence of participation in life's most fragile and meaningful currents. Think of how many people go through years hidden behind cleverness, busyness, performance, or control. They avoid being deeply affected because they fear what feeling might cost. Yet to feel deeply is not a mistake. It is the very thing that makes life more than a sequence of tasks. The sorrow that comes after love is not a failure of the heart. It is a continuation of love in another form. A painful form, yes, but still a form of the same devotion. You grieve because the bond remains active inside you, even after the outer shape has changed. In that sense, grief is love with nowhere obvious to go. It lingers because what mattered does not vanish on command. If you are carrying heartbreak tonight, whether from a person, a dream, a season, or a version of your life that slipped away, there is no need to call yourself foolish for feeling it. There is no need to rush toward being untouched. The heart cannot become wise by pretending it never cared. It becomes wise by caring and surviving the truth of what caring costs. You may still miss what hurt you. You may still long for what was never fully yours. You may still carry questions about why things changed, why someone left, why tenderness was not enough, why time moved in the direction it did. These questions are deeply human. They rise because love wants coherence. It wants to understand why beauty could not remain. Yet life rarely answers in the clean language the heart desires. More often, it gives silence, distance, and the slow education of endurance. And inside that endurance, something gentle begins. Not a hard acceptance, not a cold indifference, a softer wisdom, a growing ability to love what was, even if it could not stay. When pain is seen as the shadow of love, something in it becomes less shameful. The listener lying awake in bed is not merely a person with a problem to solve. You are a person who has cared enough to be altered. That is different. It places your suffering in a larger and more dignified frame. Your sadness may not mean that life has gone wrong. It may mean only that life touched you in earnest, that you were here for it, that you said yes to people, to hopes, to visions, to bonds, to moments, and therefore had to meet the truth that all such things are vulnerable. This is not a cruel design. It is the condition of beauty. A flower is beautiful because it does not remain. A voice is moving because it fades. An embrace matters because it ends. An evening becomes precious because it cannot be stored forever. Human beings suffer partly because they are the creatures who can recognize this. They know what passing means. They feel time. They remember. They anticipate. They lose. They love anyway. One of the most peaceful thoughts about suffering is that it changes. It may not disappear when you want it to. It may not leave in a dramatic moment. It may not even become small for a long while. But it changes. Nothing felt by a living heart remains exactly the same. Even sorrow has tides. There are nights it fills the whole room, and mornings when it sits more quietly in the corner. There are days when a memory cuts sharply, and days when the same memory arrives almost tenderly. There are seasons when pain feels like the only true language, and then, without warning, you catch yourself resting inside an ordinary moment, not healed in some final sense, not free of history, just not drowning. Change in suffering is often subtle. It happens under the surface, like winter slowly becoming less cold before spring can yet be seen, like a bruise changing color before it fades, like a room growing lighter before sunrise is obvious. The soul moves this way too, quietly, gradually, without spectacle. That is why a suffering heart can wrongly believe it will always feel exactly as it feels tonight. But feeling is movement, even when movement is slow. Lao Tzu taught that wisdom is like water. Water does not fight for hardness. It does not try to dominate what it meets. It moves around stone. It yields without disappearing. It adapts without losing its nature. Over time, it reshapes even what seems immovable, not by force, but by patience and flow. There is deep comfort in that image when thinking about pain. The mind often wants to become hard against suffering. It wants to overcome, conquer, defeat, and stand untouched. But perhaps that is why it grows so tired. Perhaps the inner struggle becomes gentler when you stop asking yourself to be a wall and begin allowing yourself to be water, soft enough to feel, but not fixed in one shape, able to move around what hurts, to carry it without becoming only it, to let it pass through different parts of your being without turning it into a permanent identity. Water does not deny the rock. It simply does not become the rock. In the same way, you do not need to deny your pain. You only need to remember that pain is not the whole shape of you. This is where acceptance becomes something beautiful and often misunderstood. Acceptance is not saying that suffering is good. It is not approving of what wounded you. It is not giving up on life. It is not deciding that nothing matters. It is simply the moment when the inner argument begins to quiet. The moment when you stop demanding that the past be different before you are allowed to breathe. The moment when you stop measuring your worth by your ability to remain untouched. The moment when you let reality be real, even if you still grieve it. There is enormous relief in this, because so much exhaustion comes not from pain alone, but from carrying pain and fighting it at the same time. Acceptance sets down part of that burden. It says, I do not have to solve tonight. I do not have to untangle every thread before morning. I do not have to know why this happened in order to stop struggling against the fact that it did. This does not make the heart numb. It makes the heart less divided against itself. And an undivided heart rests more easily, even when it still aches. You can feel the difference between defeat and acceptance in the body. Defeat collapses. It goes cold. It says, nothing matters now. Acceptance softens. It says, this matters, and I cannot force it away tonight. Defeat closes the future. Acceptance simply loosens the grip of the present. Defeat is heavy in a way that deadens. Acceptance is heavy in a way that breathes. If you listen carefully, you may know which one is present in you now. If the body is still holding on tightly, perhaps it has not yet trusted that it is safe to release the argument. That is all right. Trust comes slowly, especially if pain has taught you that letting go can feel dangerous. Many people hold on to suffering because it seems like the last remaining link to what they loved, or the last defense against being hurt again, or the last way to stay loyal to a wound that once changed them. But pain does not require permanent tension to be honored. Love does not require endless strain to be remembered. What mattered can still matter, even as the muscles soften, even as the breath lengthens, even as sleep begins to come closer. Sometimes, suffering becomes so familiar that a person begins to wear it as identity, not because they want pain, but because pain has been with them long enough to feel like a shape of self. I am the anxious one. I am the grieving one. I am the disappointed one. I am the one who was left. I am the one who never quite became what I hoped. These identities form quietly. They offer coherence. They explain. They protect. But they can also imprison. Because once pain becomes identity, every feeling must pass through its filter. Every new day arrives already named by old hurt. Every possibility is interpreted by what has already gone wrong. This is another place where gentleness matters. You do not break these identities by force. You loosen them. You notice them. You ask, with great kindness, what remains of me beyond this ache? What else am I, besides the person who carries this sorrow? The answer may come slowly, but it is there. You are also the one who notices beauty, the one who remembers kindness, the one who still longs for truth, the one who can be touched by music, by silence, by light on a wall, by a sincere voice, by by the feeling of clean sheets, by the simple mercy of lying down at the end of a hard day. Suffering moves through the self like weather through a landscape. There are storms, and there are long gray stretches, and then there are quiet clearings you do not always trust at first, because you think the storm may return. But the landscape remains more than the weather. The sky changes, the ground endures. This is a helpful image for a tired mind. Your sadness may be real and present, but it is moving through something larger than itself. It is moving through consciousness, through memory, through a body that has survived many seasons already, through a soul that has known other feelings, other versions of time, other rooms, other recoveries. Even if you cannot feel that larger space clearly tonight, it exists. Beneath the feeling, there is awareness. Beneath the ache, there is the quiet fact that you are the one noticing the ache. This does not remove suffering, but it creates room around it. Room enough for breath, room enough for mercy, room enough for the possibility that pain can pass through without becoming your permanent name. And in that room, a deeper truth often begins to appear. At the deepest level, suffering can introduce you to parts of yourself you might never have met in comfort. Not because comfort is shallow, but because ease allows many things to remain hidden. Pain changes the light in the inner house. It illuminates old rooms. It reveals unopened drawers. It brings forgotten feelings to the surface and asks whether they can finally be faced. Sometimes what aches tonight is not only about today. Sorrow may have touched a very old bruise. A present loss may have awakened earlier losses that never fully found language. A small rejection may have stirred a childhood fear of not being enough. A season of uncertainty may have exposed how much safety you had placed in being needed, admired, correct, or in control. Suffering is often larger than the event that seems to cause it, because it gathers around old roots. It pulls hidden threads into the present. It reminds you that the soul keeps long memory, even when the conscious mind tells a simpler story. This is why night can feel so full. One sadness opens, and many ancient echoes answer. Carl Jung believed that what remains unconscious still shapes our lives from below. There is something almost comforting in that, because it suggests that inner confusion is not always failure. Sometimes it is simply the mind standing at the edge of deeper material, a feeling with no clear cause, a fear that seems too large for the moment, a sorrow that carries the weight of many years at once. These may be signs that hidden parts of the self are asking to be acknowledged, not analyzed to death, not judged, acknowledged. There may be grief in you that was never allowed to grieve, anger that was swallowed because peace was expected, tenderness that had nowhere safe to go, longing that felt too embarrassing to admit, a need to be seen that learned very early to become silence instead. Suffering can be the dark mirror in which these hidden truths finally appear. And though this can feel unsettling, it can also be profoundly relieving, because there is great strain in spending years trying not to know what the soul already knows. There is peace in no longer running from yourself. Many people spend a long time trying to seem whole. They try to be reasonable, pleasant, productive, composed. They try to carry their contradictions quietly, They try to speak in manageable tones about unmanageable things. They try to make life smooth enough that no deeper fracture needs to be confronted. But suffering interrupts the performance. It makes honesty harder to avoid. It asks whether the life you are living matches the truth of your inner being. It asks what you have been leaving out. It asks what you still believe about yourself that was never true. It asks what pain you inherited, what tenderness you buried, what masks have become exhausting to wear. These are not easy questions, but they are often the questions that begin a quieter and truer life. Not a perfect one, not a constantly peaceful one, simply a less divided one. A life in which you are no longer spending so much energy pretending. A life in which sadness can exist without shame. A life in which you do not need to appear untouched to be worthy of love, rest, or dignity. There is unexpected maturity in this. Not the maturity of having answers, but the maturity of becoming more real. A person shaped by suffering often becomes less impressed by surfaces, less hungry for appearances, less interested in noise, more drawn to sincerity, more patient with complexity, more able to sit beside another person without rushing to fix them, more aware that every bright thing is fragile and every ordinary moment deserves respect. This maturity is quiet. It does not announce itself. It often looks like speaking more gently, listening longer, needing less performance, letting silence be enough, understanding that people are carrying more than they can say. Understanding too that you are one of those people, and that this does not lessen you, it deepens you. The heart that has suffered and remained open becomes a different kind of place. Not lighter, exactly, but wider, more spacious, more able to hold contradictions, more able to feel grief and gratitude in the same hour, more able to love without demanding guarantees, more able to rest without having solved life completely. Perhaps this is one of the hidden gifts of suffering. Not that it hurts, but that it makes pretense harder. It can remove the old pressure to be simple, polished, endlessly capable. It gives permission to become human in a fuller sense, to admit need, to acknowledge fear, to carry tenderness without apology, to stop expecting yourself to be a machine for coping. There is such relief in this, especially late at night, because the sleepless mind is often cruel not only about what hurts, but about the fact that it hurts at all. It whispers that you should be stronger, calmer, clearer, past this by now. But what if none of that is needed tonight? What if what is needed is simply the recognition that being affected by life is the most normal thing in the world? What if your tiredness is not weakness, but evidence of carrying? What if your sadness is not failure, but testimony? What if your need for rest is sacred, not selfish? These questions do not solve pain. They soften the inner judge. And when the inner judge quiets, the nervous system begins to believe in safety again. There is beauty, strange and quiet, in being a creature who can be touched. You can be hurt, yes, but you can also be moved. The same openness that lets suffering in also lets wonder in. It lets music matter. It lets memory glow. It lets beauty stop you for no reason. It lets love enter your ordinary life and make it shine. It lets a few kind words stay with you for years. It lets you feel the immense softness of being alive for a little while in a world full of temporary things. If you closed yourself enough to avoid all pain, you would close yourself to these things too. And though suffering may make you long, at times, for numbness, the deepest part of you does not truly want a numb life. It wants a safe life, a held life, a life where feeling can exist without becoming unbearable. That is why this moment matters. This lying here in the quiet. This not having to perform. This allowing your own humanity to be met with gentleness. Safety does not always mean the absence of pain. Sometimes it means the presence of kindness around pain. There may be specific faces inside your suffering tonight. A person you miss, a person who disappointed you, a person you could not keep, a person you could not become fully known to. Or perhaps there is your own face from another time, younger, more hopeful, less tired, looking back at you from some remembered year. Sometimes the heart suffers because it is still in conversation with someone absent. It is still explaining, asking, apologizing, imagining, remembering. Whole relationships continue inside the mind long after the outer contact has changed. This is one reason the night can feel crowded. The room is quiet, but inwardly, many voices are still speaking. The mind revisits scenes, trying to make sense of them. If only I had said this. If only I had known. If only they had stayed. If only I had been different. These are ancient human thoughts. They rise because the heart wants repair. It wants the story to settle into a form that can be held. But many stories do not close neatly. Some remain open at the edges. They teach us how to live with unfinishedness. There is sorrow in unfinishedness, but there is also tenderness. Think of all the things in a human life that remain partially unresolved. The parent who was loved and misunderstood at the same time. The friend you drifted from, without one clear reason. The younger self you still wish to comfort. The apology that came too late. The thank you that was never fully spoken. The city you left. The house that exists now, only in memory. The plan that once seemed certain. The child you used to be when the world was larger and stranger and not yet organized into adult categories. None of these things are complete. They live in you not as finished chapters, but as soft, unfinished lines. And perhaps one reason suffering can feel so haunting is that it does not fit neatly into closure. It remains alive because life itself is not cleanly resolved. Human beings carry threads. They do not always carry completed patterns. Yet there is still grace in this. An unfinished life is not a failed life. It is simply a living one. Only what is dead is fully concluded. Regret often arrives with suffering, and it has its own special ache. Regret is painful because it contains imagination. It creates another version of the world and places you just outside it. In regret, the mind becomes a maker of ghost paths. It says there was a better sentence I could have spoken, a wiser choice I could have made, a gentler response, a braver act, a clearer understanding, a more loving timing. Regret can be one of the heaviest burdens at night because it sounds so convincing. It wears the voice of certainty, though it is born from hindsight. But the self who regrets now is not the self who acted then. The self who regrets has information, maturity, tenderness, and clarity that may not have been available in the moment. This does not erase responsibility, and it does not make every wound simple, yet it introduces mercy. You were always acting from the limits of your understanding at the time. Human beings do not choose with full knowledge. They choose while confused, tired, hopeful, fearful, lonely, defensive, yearning, unfinished, and later, they judge from a distance. The heart needs compassion here too. If there is regret moving quietly through you tonight, it may help to think of how many versions of yourself have existed already. The child who did not know, the teenager who felt everything too sharply, or not at all. The young adult trying to become someone in a confusing world. The tired self who made choices from pain. The hopeful self who believed too quickly. The guarded self who withdrew too soon. The gentle self who stayed too long. These selves are all you, and yet each one knew only a part of the story. To demand perfection from them is to misunderstand what a human life is. A life is not a sequence of flawless decisions made by a fully formed being. It is a long unfolding, a long education in love, fear, truth, consequence, tenderness, and limitation. Regret hurts because it shows where your values are now. It shows what you wish you could have done with greater wisdom. In that sense, regret is not only pain, it is moral awakening. It is the heart learning what it truly wants to stand for. That learning is costly, but it is real. And the one who learned deserves rest too. There are also sufferings that do not come from dramatic wounds, but from the long, slow friction of ordinary life. The loneliness of being needed by many and fully known by few. The fatigue of responsibility, the quiet sadness of watching years move, the strange realization that adulthood is often made of carrying things no one applauds. Bills, errands, aging bodies, changing roles, worries about people you love, small daily acts that keep life together while your own inner life waits patiently in the background. There is suffering in the ordinary. The sink filled again, the email unanswered, the season ended, the face in the mirror changing, the child growing up, the parent growing older, the friend growing distant, the body asking for more rest than the schedule allows. These things do not always look like suffering from the outside, but the soul feels them. A human life is not only shaped by large events, it is shaped by repetition, by the 1,000 quiet moments in which you keep going, while also slowly being changed by time. This is why gentleness matters so much, not only for dramatic pain, but for all the small invisible weariness that accumulates over years. People often imagine suffering as a single event, but much of it is simply the gradual weight of being a person, having duties, having memory, having hope that gets tested, having a body that does not remain the same, having relationships that require patience and forgiveness and courage, having desires that do not fit neatly into the life available, having to choose again and again how to use limited time in a world full of needs. This kind of suffering is rarely discussed in bold language because it is so common. Yet common does not mean easy. The very commonness can make it harder, because people feel they should not complain about what everyone carries, but each heart still feels its own measure of strain. And what is common to all may be exactly what most needs tenderness. Not because it is unusual, but because it is unending. The daily human work of being alive asks much from the soul. When you begin to see suffering as part of the shared human condition rather than a private punishment, another feeling can arise beside it. Compassion, not only for others, but for yourself. And self-compassion is often quieter than people think. It is not dramatic self-praise. It is not turning away from responsibility. It is the simple refusal to become cruel toward your own humanity. It is speaking inwardly in a voice that does not add harm. It is admitting that you are tired without making tiredness a moral failure. It is recognizing pain without demanding instant improvement. It is allowing slowness, allowing uncertainty. Allowing the possibility that some nights are not for solving, but for being carried. Compassion says, of course this is hard. Of course you feel this. Of course the heart would ache here. It does not make pain vanish, but it changes the texture of the inner world. Instead of being alone with suffering and judgment, you are alone with suffering and kindness. That difference can be the beginning of peace. Perhaps one of the saddest habits people learn is to speak to themselves more harshly than they would ever speak to a loved one. A friend confesses they are struggling, and you soften. You understand. You tell them there is no shame in being overwhelmed. But when the same thing happens inside you, another voice appears. It is impatient, disappointed, cold. It says you should be stronger, wiser, faster, more finished than this. Yet what has this voice ever truly healed? Harshness may create temporary control, but it rarely creates peace. The heart does not open under attack. It hides, it braces, it becomes more frightened of its own honesty. If you want suffering to become less sharp, one of the most beautiful things you can do is stop using your own thoughts as weapons against yourself. Let the inner voice grow quieter. Let it become less like a judge and more like a bedside presence, not falsely cheerful, simply gentle, simply calm, simply willing to remain with what hurts without making it worse. There is something deeply peaceful in remembering that no feeling is required to last forever in its most intense form. Even the body knows this. It cannot sustain panic endlessly. It cannot weep without pause for all of time. The systems of life are built with tides. Wakefulness yields to fatigue. Tightness yields, eventually, to release. Thoughts lose force when not constantly fed. Sorrow itself has rhythms. It rises, peaks, recedes, returns in a new way. This does not mean your pain is small. It means your pain belongs to life, and life moves. You do not have to force this movement. In fact, forcing often interrupts it, but you can cooperate with it. You can refrain from gripping every feeling as if it were eternal truth. You can let a thought pass without turning it into identity. You can notice the body asking for softness and not answer only with tension. You can allow exhaustion to be what it is, a signal, a limit, a wise request from the whole of your being for less effort and more surrender. There is dignity in listening. Sometimes peace enters not as insight, but as the body finally believing it is allowed to rest. This is why a slow breath matters. Not because breathing solves grief, but because the body and mind are not strangers. When the breath softens, the mind receives a message. Not everything is attacking you right now. When the shoulders lower, something ancient in the nervous system hears a kind of permission. You do not have to hold the whole world up through the night. When the jaw loosens, some small hidden vigilance can begin to release. The body has been carrying thoughts too. It has been holding questions as muscle, and worry as posture, and memory as tension. A peaceful thought about suffering, then, is not only philosophical, it is physical. It says, tonight, the body does not need to rehearse every pain to prove that the pain was real. Tonight, the body may simply lie here, supported, breathing, heavy in the good way, allowed to stop, allowed to be a living creature who has done enough for one day. If you listen inwardly now, perhaps you can sense that your mind has many layers. There is the upper layer of immediate thought, the one that names, compares, remembers, plans. Beneath it, there is feeling. Beneath feeling, there is weariness. Beneath weariness, there may be longing. Beneath longing, there is often love. And beneath even that, there is a kind of quiet awareness that simply witnesses all of it. This witness is not cold. It is spacious. It has been with you through every age of your life. It watched you as a child when your feelings were enormous and unnamed. It watched you in moments of joy, embarrassment, confusion, tenderness. It watched you become different people across the years. It is watching now as this present version of you lies here carrying what it can. There is comfort in remembering this deeper awareness, not because it takes the pain away, but because it means there is more to you than any single feeling passing through. Something in you is larger than tonight's sorrow. Something in you can hold it, observe it, and gradually let it settle. This larger self is not distant from your pain. It is the part that can be kind to it. The part that can say, yes, I know this is here. The part that does not panic at every wave. The part that can trust that feeling is not catastrophe. That sorrow can be visited without being swallowed whole. That memory can arise without demanding endless rehearsal. The listening self does not need to judge what comes. It simply notices a memory of a face, a fear about the future, a sudden heaviness for no clear reason, a tenderness for your younger self, a wish that things had gone differently. All of this can be noticed, named softly if needed, and allowed to pass through the inner room without causing alarm. Notice how different that feels from wrestling. Wrestling makes every thought louder. Noticing lets thoughts become less solid, more like clouds than commands, more like ripples than verdicts. This is not detachment in a cold sense. It is intimacy without panic. It is staying close to your own experience without turning the whole night into a courtroom. There may always be some mystery in suffering. This is another peaceful thought. It means you do not need to explain everything fully to justify your own feelings. Some pain comes from clear events, yes, but some suffering is existential. It rises from the sheer fact of being alive in time, from knowing that all things change, from sensing the distance between who you are and who you hoped to become, from feeling how brief each season is, from carrying the knowledge that everyone you love is mortal, including you, from living inside a beautiful world that does not promise permanence. This kind of sorrow belongs not to pathology, but to consciousness itself. To be awake is to feel it sometimes. To be tender is to feel it more. There is nothing wrong with you for having nights when the mystery feels heavy. That mystery has sat beside philosophers, poets, parents, workers, children, elders, lovers, and lonely people in every age. It is part of the soul's life, and because it is part of life, it does not have to be banished before sleep. It can simply quiet down and rest beside you. Even the fear of suffering is a form of suffering. The fear that this pain will stay forever. The fear that if you let yourself feel, you will not come back from it. The fear that life has already passed some hidden point of no return. The fear that you will never again be as light as you once were. These fears visit many people at night, but notice how they live in the future. They imagine permanence. They tell a story of endlessness, and yet the truth of life is movement. You have already been many selves. You have already survived feelings that once seemed impossible. There were nights before this one. There were mornings you did not think would feel gentle, and then, somehow, they did. Not perfect, just gentler. This does not mean you must trust the future completely. It means you do not need to believe every fearful prediction the tired mind creates. Night magnifies. It makes feelings look eternal. But feelings are shaped by hours, by hormones, by memory, by the body's state, by the soul's weather. They are real, but they are not always final. One of the most tender things about being human is that we keep trying, even while we are unfinished. We continue loving, while knowing love risks grief. We continue making homes in time, while knowing time moves. We continue speaking and reaching and planning and hoping in the face of uncertainty. There is quiet courage in this. Not the loud kind, not the kind that needs applause, the kind that wakes up and makes tea, the kind that answers messages, the kind that shows up for children, friends, work, or simply the next necessary task while carrying invisible sadness, the kind that lies awake and still has not entirely closed its heart to life. If you are here tonight, listening inwardly, feeling deeply, still asking gentle questions about meaning and pain and peace, that already says something tender about you. Something alive remains. Something still turns toward understanding instead of only numbness. Something still wants to meet life honestly. That is a kind of goodness, not a triumphant goodness, a human one. It may help to remember that your life has not been made only of suffering, even if suffering feels especially present right now. Somewhere in your history are moments of warmth, even if they arrive tonight only faintly. Someone laughed once and you felt safe. Morning light once fell across a room in a way that made everything seem briefly simple. A hand touched your shoulder and meant it. A meal restored you after a hard day. A song found you at the right moment. A child's voice, a pet's quiet presence, the smell of rain. the sight of trees moving in wind, a conversation that needed no performance, the first cool side of the pillow, the relief of taking off shoes after being on your feet too long. Life has always mixed sorrow with these small mercies. The mind in pain often forgets them, not because they were false, but because pain narrows attention. It makes the world smaller. Yet the larger world remains, not as an argument against suffering, but as context. The heart is wounded, yes. It is also still capable of receiving gentleness. And perhaps this is enough for tonight. Not the full recovery of joy, not permanent resolution, simply enough room for a little gentleness, enough room for the day to loosen its grip, enough room for the body to stop rehearsing every unfinished thing, enough room for memory to become quieter, for questions to become less urgent, for grief to set down its voice and breathe. Sleep does not ask you to become enlightened before it comes. It asks for trust. It asks that you stop standing guard over every thought. It asks that you allow the night to hold what you cannot hold alone. This is difficult for many people because wakefulness can feel like responsibility, as if staying alert might somehow protect what matters, solve what hurts, prevent what is uncertain. But the night is not asking you to abandon what matters. It is asking you to let it rest too. Your worries do not become more real because you keep them awake. Your love does not become more true because it remains tense. Even devotion needs sleep. You can set things down without losing them. This is important. You can stop thinking about someone for a few hours and still love them. You can release a question until morning and still care about its answer. You can loosen regret for one night and still honor what it taught you. You can let the body sleep and still remain faithful to whatever grief or longing is part of your life. Rest is not betrayal. That is, rest is not forgetting. Rest is trust in another form. Trust that what is real will still be real tomorrow. Trust that what matters does not need constant mental gripping to survive the night. Trust that the deeper parts of you know how to carry things even when conscious thought releases them. There is great peace in this. The peace of knowing you do not have to prove your seriousness through exhaustion. You do not have to prove your love through tension. You do not have to prove your goodness through endless analysis. You are allowed to be a finite creature. You are allowed to sleep. Imagine, if you like, that everything you carried today could be placed beside the bed, not thrown away, not denied, simply set down. The conversation you keep replaying, the thing you should have said, the thing you wish had not happened, the fear about someone you love, the uncertainty about your future, the sadness with no single cause, the old grief that still visits, the tiredness that settled into your muscles, the pressure to know what comes next. Place them down gently, as one places shoes at the door after a long walk. They are still yours. They have not vanished. But they do not need to remain on your chest tonight. They can wait beside you in the dark. They can become less like burdens inside the body and more like objects resting on the floor of the room. The body itself can become separate from the day's history. It can become simpler again. A breathing form beneath blankets, a heart beating quietly, hands resting, eyes closed or ready to close, a living being returning to its natural rhythm. The mind may still bring thoughts, That is all right. Let them come as visitors. A face, a fear, a question, a memory. Let each one arrive, sit for a moment, and move on if it wishes. There is no need to build a house for every passing thought. There is no need to defend against each one. The mind thinks. That is what minds do. But not every thought deserves your full wakefulness. Some are simply remnants of the day. Some are old habits. Some are grief echoing because the room is quiet enough to hear it. Some are the nervous system checking whether it is safe to let go. You can answer all of them with the same gentle response. I hear you. Not now. Rest. It is a beautiful thing to become less available to mental noise without becoming hostile to it. To let thoughts know they have been acknowledged, but will not be given the whole night. This is another way suffering grows softer. It loses its power to command every corner of attention. It becomes one part of the room, not the whole room. If tears are near, they can be welcome too. Tears are not a disruption of peace. They are often part of it. They are the body's own form of release, the heart speaking through water. Nothing needs to be dramatic about them. They can come quietly, like a small rain that passes and leaves the air clearer. Many people think peace means the absence of tears, but often peace is what allows tears at last. Because peace says you no longer have to hold the dam so tightly. You no longer have to remain composed for anyone. You no longer have to translate your sorrow into usefulness before it is allowed to exist. Tonight, the heart can simply be what it is. If it is tender, let it be tender. If it is tired, let it be tired. If it is grateful and sad at once, let both be true. Human beings are large enough for mixed feelings. A life deeply lived always contains more than one emotional color at a time: grief and relief, love and disappointment, weariness and wonder, fear and trust. Let them rest together without forcing resolution. There is also a peaceful thought in remembering that not everything painful is a mistake. Some forms of suffering are signs of inner health. Conscience hurts when you live against your values. Grief hurts because love was real. Loneliness hurts because connection matters. Regret hurts because goodness still lives in you and wishes it had acted differently. Weariness hurts because limits exist and must be respected. Even anxiety, though difficult, often begins as care without enough safety. Seen this way, pain is not always an enemy. It is sometimes a messenger, a clumsy one, perhaps, an overwhelming one at times, but still a messenger. It says, "This matters, this needs attention, this part of you is alive." And while you do not need to obey every message in the middle of the night, you can honor the basic truth that suffering often arises around what the soul considers important. There is dignity in that. It means your pain is not random noise. It has roots in love, value, vulnerability, and longing. To know this is to stop despising yourself for feeling. As the night deepens, you may notice that thoughts become less precise. They blur a little at the edges. This can feel uncomfortable if you are trying to keep control, but soothing if you are ready to let the strict outlines of the day soften. In this softening, suffering changes its face again. It becomes less like a case to study and more like a tired companion who no longer needs so many words. Perhaps that is all pain wants in the end. Not endless analysis, not dramatic declaration, just companionship. Just the sense that it does not have to cry out because it has been heard. When pain is heard, it often quiets. Not because it is cured, but because it no longer has to shout through the closed door of avoidance. You can offer that, listening now, quietly, without strain. I know you are here. I know you have had much to carry. I know you have protected important things. I know you are tired. This is enough. In such inward speech there is great tenderness, the kind that slowly invites sleep. If suffering has made you feel smaller, remember that it has also brought you into contact with what is most universal. Every civilization has made songs, stories, prayers, poems, and philosophies because human beings have always needed help carrying what hurts. The loneliness you feel is real, but it is not solitary in the great sense. Across centuries, others have lain awake with grief in their throats. Others have watched moonlight on a floor and wondered how to endure a changing life. Others have touched the empty side of a bed or stared into darkness after hearing difficult news or felt regret settle heavily in the body. Others have tried to make peace with pain without becoming numb. In this way, you are accompanied by countless invisible hearts, not in a noisy crowd, but in a quiet lineage. A lineage of people who loved and lost, carried and questioned, hoped and healed imperfectly. You belong to them, to the tender ones, to the wakeful ones, to those who kept seeking wisdom, not to become superior, but to become gentle enough to survive being human. There is an old softness in belonging to the human story. You do not have to be exceptional in your pain. You do not have to justify it by making it unique. You can simply let it be one thread in a vast woven fabric of longing, loss, tenderness, memory, and care. This does not make your suffering less personal. It makes it less isolated. You are not outside the circle because you hurt. You are inside it because you can hurt, and because you can still listen for peace within the hurt. Even now, while lying in the dark, there is something profoundly communal about your experience. Others have asked these same wordless questions. Others have searched for a way to rest without denying reality. Others have discovered that the heart can soften before life makes full sense. You are allowed that same softness. You are allowed to receive wisdom not as instruction, but as company. Not as a demand to become a different person overnight, but as a lamp set quietly beside the bed. Enough light to see that the room is not empty. Enough light to know that what you carry has been carried before. Sometimes, suffering opens the door to gratitude in a form that comfort never could. Not forced gratitude, not the kind that pretends pain is pleasant, a deeper kind, the gratitude of realizing what remains, the gratitude for breath itself when the mind has been racing, the gratitude for a body that still tries to heal, even while tired, the gratitude for anyone, past or present, who has offered you gentleness, the gratitude for the part of you that did not go completely numb, the gratitude for this night, imperfect as it is, because it gives you a chance to be honest in the dark. Gratitude does not cancel suffering, but it places it in a larger field. It reminds you that even amid ache, there are still traces of care woven through your life. A bed, a blanket, a memory of being loved, a line of wisdom that reached you, a tomorrow not yet written, the ability to pause, the ability to breathe, the possibility of sleep. These are small things only until you need them. Then they become immense, and perhaps their smallness is part of their holiness. Aging brings its own peaceful thoughts about suffering. As the years move, many people slowly discover that life cannot be controlled into perfection. There will be misunderstandings. Bodies will change. Plans will bend. People will leave by distance, by conflict, by death, by the ordinary drift of time. Even the self will not remain stable in the way youth imagined. There is sadness in this, yes, but there is also release. The older soul often grows less shocked by pain, not because it stops feeling, but because it begins to understand the shape of things. It knows that every season has a cost. It knows that joy and sorrow often travel together. It knows that much of wisdom is learning how to hold what changes without demanding permanence from it. This wisdom can come to you tonight, even if you are young, because wisdom is not only a matter of years, it is a matter of seeing clearly. And suffering, for all its difficulty, often clears the sight. It shows that life is precious, not because it stays, but because it passes. Precious because it passes. And what of death, the deepest shadow behind so much suffering? Even when not named directly, it lives underneath many human fears. The fear of losing others, the fear of time moving too quickly, the fear of not having said enough, loved enough, become enough. Mortality gives suffering much of its sting because it reminds the heart that everything is finite. Yet mortality also gives tenderness, its urgency.